There are millions of acres of opportunity out there. They belong to you. Every day, decisions are being made that affect your land, your water, your wildlife. You should know about them. This is Your Mountain. Welcome, everybody, to the Your Mountain podcast. We are coming to you from Studio 1A, as we often do, on a beautiful day in America, the day after, we're recording this the day after the big election you may have all heard about.
What makes it beautiful, David?
Because life goes on, no matter what you.
Because the campaign ads have stopped.
Because the campaign ads have stopped. I can start now. When I watch TV, I can be watching the My Pillow guy again instead of all these campaign ads.
The sun rose today.
Yeah, it's the world didn't come to an end, and believe it or not, it's not going to come to an end. Our country's going to be just fine. And, we want to talk a little bit about that today, kind of an election 2018 breakdown, right?
That's right.
That's kind of what we're looking at doing today. So, as always, Mike McGrady.
David.
Aren't you as excited as I am?
I am excited. Oh, I'm still here.
Oh, no, that's Nephi.
And I'm here too.
Yeah, Nephi, you're still here. And you're excited.
Yeah, it's a great day. It's a great day. It's an interesting topic. We're going to make it entertaining, believe it or not. It's going to be fun.
Yeah, I think it is. And I know, there's probably people out there that are thrilled with the election results. There are probably people out there that are terrified about what the election results might mean for them. We want to talk about, and there's so many things we could talk about in the world of elections, right? We want to talk about today, what impact, what do the elections on the local, the state, the national level, what do they mean for sportsmen?
Yep,
and for issues that are important to sportsmen.
We're going to talk about the policy aspects, not the politics aspects.
Right. Yeah. No, we don't want to get into the politics of it.
But we're just going to tell you how we're going to talk about the sausage factory.
Yeah. So what's going to happen? Yeah, so that's what we want to talk about. So where do you guys want to start? Do we want to start on the local level and work our way up? Do we want to start?
Let's talk about what happened last night first, maybe. Can we just cover it broadly?
Or maybe since we're recording this now, but it's going to come out next week, should we say what happened last week?
Yeah, you guys all know what happened.
You know what happened, right?
Yeah, what happened last week, you had everybody, the news stories are going to be spun different directions. News story number one is the Democrats took the House. Okay, so what happened is you had 435 representatives, and a majority of them used to be Republican, and now a slim majority of them are Democratic. And so what that does is it changes the leadership in half of Congress. So the House of Representatives, you're going to see a change in leadership. And so with that's going to come a change in priorities associated with that change in leadership.
And when you're talking change in leadership, that doesn't just mean at the Speaker of the House level. That doesn't just mean, we're going to go from Paul Ryan to Nancy Pelosi.
Yep, it's going to be all the way down. So here's an example of how that works. So in the Natural Resources Committee, he used to have Rob Bishop was the chair of the Natural Resources Committee.
Rob Bishop from Utah.
Chairman Bishop
from Utah.
Republican Utah. And then you had Grijalva, right?
From Arizona,
who was the vice chair.
Or a minority.
Right? The minority leader.
Yeah.
Yes,
ranking member.
Ranking member. And so now they swap. So that's how it works. Now
That's
how it works. But when a committee swaps, when the leadership changes and the new party takes power, and so you're going to have the Democrat controlling the House Natural Resources Committee, like every other standing committee. That means they also control the agenda of that committee and the types of bills that can be considered by that committee.
Yep.
So it does have an impact as far as what types of bills can be considered by the committee and ultimately taken to the floor for consideration and vote and passage.
That's right, because the guys who are in charge, what they're really defining are things like the calendar and then what's on the list that we're going to talk about today. And so that's where it becomes pretty powerful, is because when you decide, there are so many ideas, right, that come up to Congress. It's not like they can act on everything. We've talked about that before, right? It's like
act on everything. I just want them to act on one thing.
so they can't. So yeah. So what they do is they have to prioritize and they have to figure stuff out what they're going to work on, and that is really where the chairman. That's the power that they hold. They're going to control that.
Right. And so that's the new reality on the House side.
That's the reality on the House side. Now
on the Senate side, so Republicans had a slim majority going into this election. They had 51.
Yeah.
But before we go to the Senate, I just want to talk real quick on the House side. It's not just that you have the chairman; it's that the committees are going to be weighted in favor of the prevailing party.
Yeah, based on
the majority party. So there are going to be more members on those committees, and that means that anytime there's an issue up for vote, if they vote according to party, that issue goes through. One of the key components of that is that also means that the Rules Committee has more people on it from the Democrat Party. And when those rules are define how each bill is going to hit the floor, what's going to happen, how long you're going to vote, and basically how many amendments can occur and all those things. So having the chairmanship and having the majority has a significant impact on all of the ways in which a bill flows through that House.
Yep. So
and let's be clear, so Mike is speaking from experience. I mean, you at one point, long ago,
that's right,
back in,
half a life ago,
back in Precambrian era time, you were a House staffer.
Right.
Yeah. A member staffer on the House side.
Correct.
Yeah. So basically, you're writing the rules for how the game's going to get played in that side of Congress.
Yeah, because each bill that comes up, the Rules Committee gets together and they figure out how they're going to do, how they're going to deal with that one particular bill. Whereas in the Senate, they have rules that are written that address all bills, and so it's just a different sort of makeup. And that is where you saw in the last Congress, there are a lot of ways in which the limitation on what kind of amendments could come in, how long people could talk, and just a whole host of things that basically allow for a majority rule or a mob rule in the House of Representatives, which is very different from the Senate.
The Senate's more gentlemanly.
Well, yeah. It is different in that it's thought to be more studious and thoughtful on
harumph, more harumph,
right? As opposed to just just sort of getting things done and through.
Well, and the House side typically runs on a majority, right? I mean, so if you want to pass a bill, you need a simple majority to pass a bill out of the House. On the Senate side, by comparison, there are 100 members of the Senate. You have to get to 60 votes. You need more than a simple majority to pass a bill on the Senate side.
Which is a great segue into talking about what happened on the Senate. So on the Senate, the Republicans had 51.
Mike's looking at me like maybe I misstated something there.
Well, the rules are complex on the Senate side in that sometimes simple majority is all that's necessary. Sometimes you need 60, but generally in order to get to a vote, you have to have that 60 vote majority in order to get closer to start the final debate and get to the vote. And so any senator can say that they would like to see things stopped or whatever, or they can threaten to filibuster or whatever, which doesn't usually happen these days. But it allows for an individual member, one of 100, to hold something up, put a hold on something and stop something. Whereas in the House, it's mob rule. It's just if you can get a simple majority, you're just going to push that through, regardless of opposition.
Now, this becomes important later, and we'll come back to why it becomes important. But in the Senate, you had a gain of Republican seats in the Senate. So while you lost Republican seats in the House, you saw a gain in the Senate. And to me, I think it's really important to
just a handful. Just be clear.
2 to 3, 4.
Yeah.
We don't know. We know. I'm sure when you listen to this, we're going to know.
At the time we're recording right now, there are a couple of seats that are still undecided.
In the balance.
And there's at least one that the runoff won't occur until early December. So
yeah.
But it's going to be a gain for the Republicans.
It will be.
And so what that does is it makes it easier to move stuff through that side of the House. Because, so for example, somebody who had if you had some people who were on the fence, you can afford more people on the fence now if you have more people in your corner one or two guys can be on the fence on something and you can still move it through because you have the power.
Well, things like, for example, judicial appointments where
somebody could hold it up
they've actually changed the rules to allow a simple majority to confirm a judge. Right now, where you might have under the prior arrangement, if you didn't have you only had some flexibility to lose 2 Republican senators because you have the tie-breaking vote of the vice president in the Senate. You only had the ability to lose 2 senators on a confirmation and still be able to confirm that person. So from a standpoint of being able to confirm presidential appointments, it becomes
significant.
A few seat gain is a significant gain for being able to have confirmations of not just judges but other cabinet level appointments and other Senate required confirmations of administration personnel.
Right.
So just to give you
and all of that we just said is in addition to what we said about the House of the committee makeup, in that the majority there has the ability to be chairman. And set the agenda,
so very similar
set the
to that
schedule
House.
And all those things.
Right.
And this becomes important because when you start talking about things that are going to become law, if something's going to get on the president's desk, it's going to go through both houses. It's either going to have it's either going to have a matching bill or a similar bill on both houses that then you have to have concurrence.
So obviously, go out and watch Schoolhouse Rock.
Yeah.
If you haven't seen Schoolhouse Rock, I watched that in second grade, third grade, last week with my kids. Schoolhouse Rock, how a bill becomes a law.
Yeah, right.
It's the best 5 minutes you'll spend.
By Cameron Presentment.
Yeah.
Understand that because that's going to keep people. So for people that are wondering, well, what's going to happen now that this party controls this aspect or that aspect? Well, just know that if something's going to get done, now it's going to have to get done by 2 groups who may not have, they aren't necessarily like-minded, and so
what you're trying to say, for the sportsman that's listening and does not care about politics that much.
Yeah.
What you're trying to say is, just because something gets through one house doesn't mean it's going to get through the other and make it to the president's desk.
That's right.
A lot of times you see bills go through and members of Congress will send out a press release and folks will say, it's great, we got this great thing done. But in reality, that was only a minor part of it and it still needs to go to the other chamber.
Yeah.
And that process needs to start all over again. So, anytime you are seeing some sort of call to action or request for funds or whatever because something happened or it's about to happen or some vote's about to happen, you got to remember and take it with a grain of salt that there's a lot more to the process that needs to occur. And given that we are going to have 2 different parties controlling,
parts of the Senate, parts of Congress,
different chambers in the Congress, makes it unlikely that whatever one side does that you hate is unlikely to get through the other side.
Yeah, there's going to have to be compromise.
Let's do a couple of examples. I mean, let's do some real world examples of what this means. What this new, we'll call it new reality. It's not even really. I mean, this happens all the time. This happens all the time.
Yeah, 2000 to 2010.
Yeah, all the time. So let's use a couple of examples. So a couple of issues that are very important to sportsmen, at least in our experience working with them. You have public lands.
Public lands, perfect.
That's one. And Second Amendment, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Firearms. Those are 2 issues that are very important to sportsmen. And I would argue one is far more polarizing than the other. And maybe not polarizing is the wrong way to put it, but well, let's just talk about 2 and we'll kind of get into that.
So let's take them. So drop one at a time. Let's talk A in lands. One house. So, so we'll put A.
Let's talk public lands.
Public lands. We'll put public
So what's
lands.
the fear out there with public lands?
The fear out there with public lands is that we're going to get is public lands transfer. And this is really interesting because if you look at public lands transfer, the idea of it versus the reality of it, you've had something like 8 states have picked it up and kind of run with it to a degree, but really any legislative action that has like actual muscle behind it has never happened.
And I think by run with it, you mean somebody
said, let's do a study about it. And you couldn't, and you can't even get most states to study it.
And you're talking about state level.
Yeah,
It's at the
so
state
you're talking
level.
about one legislator
At a state level,
saying this is something that I'm
going to do a bill
I want to do a bill
to send to I'm going to send the results up to Congress, hoping they'll do something.
Right. Okay.
But as far as
I wanted to not confuse the listener on. We were talking about the United States Congress.
Yeah, and now we're dropping to the
states. But what you're saying is a lot of times state legislatures will pass some sort of resolution or something
referendum
that is essentially a petition to Congress to do something about the subject matter they've
now
raised.
Utah is an exception. Utah
even
had a bill where Utah really, it was Lee that tried to carry.
That was at the federal level.
At the federal level,
we got to be careful bouncing around here too much. What I wanted to say on that state level, really quick, to Mike's point is, that the process that the states use, the legislatures use to try and influence or provide recommendations to Congress is through this resolution process. Mm-hmm. But to be clear, those resolutions related to public land transfers, as in advocating for those transfers to the states, have not had traction in the states to get to that resolution form, to even go to Congress, to even start that discussion.
Yeah, but there is a greater, because of some stuff that's happened and it's been in party planks and things like that, there is that concern out there, and that's it's tied to also a feeling, a perception at least, that whether true or not, that the Democratic Party cares more about conservation issues. And I think that's arguable. But that in terms of things like the Land and Water Conservation Fund, that's the party that we're going to, they want to hang their hat on those conservation issues. So that's been a concept with that. So we're just saying that. So if you were going to say which part of Congress is going to prioritize, those issues, well, we're going to say that it's going to, that maybe the House in this example likes them more, right? And so we're thinking that when something happens, for sportsmen, if you're concerned that something's going to happen, you can look at your buttress, your backstop as being, oh, well, when it gets to the House, they're going to have my back, right? Well, the opposite might be able to be said about Second Amendment issues.
Well, hang on. Come back to the public lands piece really quick.
Sure.
I want to kind of drive a stake into this a little bit. I want to ask the question of, even when, like you said, that there's this perception out there that Republicans might be more likely to support a public land transfer, right? We just came out of a situation, well, we still have it for the next couple of months, where you have a Republican-controlled House, Republican-controlled Senate, Republican-controlled White House.
Yeah.
In your opinion, in that scenario, what is the likelihood of seeing a bill work its way through the process that we're talking about? That
it's not going to.
That allows for this public land transfer.
We're not going to see anything. So even if you're like, hey, we'll talk about lame duck later, but this is a lame duck. If you were going to try and push something sneaky through and get it done as a part of building your legacy, hey, this might be your opportunity. You're not going to see this. You're not going to see a bill like this.
Right. So there's a lot of, I see it all the time. I see a lot of social media posts saying public lands, public hands, bumper stickers, public lands, public hands.
And we all agree. But the funny thing is, and here's the thing, we all agree. Like, that's the funny thing. It's like, this has been made a partisan issue. It's not. It's a non-partisan issue.
Are you suggesting that those bumper stickers came with a request for a donation?
No, I'm just...
It's not... There are individual people out there that are advocating for it. There's not enough collective momentum behind it. So I understand the drive, the push, even the fundraising piece you talk about, Mike, to some extent, of saying we need to keep this in the forefront to beat those few people back so it doesn't gain momentum. So part of that movement is, I think, aimed at preventing momentum. But let's be realistic about it. It's unlikely to happen in a completely one-party controlled Congress, and now we're going to have a Congress that is, House being Democrat controlled, Senate being Republican controlled. The likelihood of it happening is almost nothing.
Well, and I think just to get into the little bit into the politics of it. I think that part of that push was based upon the prior administration's actions at the administrative state. And with the flip and the deconstruction of the administrative state, the impetus or the sort of, the support for the public land transfer went away with it. I see it as there's a difference.
There was a rebellion
because Trump
against
won.
Yeah, there was a thought that there was a rebellion against the previous administration, saying the only way we're going to be able to have any say is to have this under the control of states instead of federal government. So it's a complex issue.
It is, and I just think that that's a component to it, and it threw a little bit of cold water on the fire.
Yeah. So are we ready to move on?
Yeah, let's talk firearms.
Okay. So Second Amendment. So this is where you'd have to see your buttress on the other side. And I think this changes when we talk about the state level, which we're going to talk about in a moment. But on the federal level, you have people that ran with very clear agenda of, it was part of their campaign is gun control, right. Second Amendment stuff. And so, and that's such a sticky wicket because none of that's really well defined. And so what means one thing to one person means something to another person. It's really a challenging issue. And so, so that you're backstop there if you're a sportsman.
So let's be clear. So the presumption here is that you are more likely to have Democrats that are pushing
from the House,
that are advocating for gun control. And now that they have, or some kind of enhanced gun regulation, and now that they have control of the House, they could, as Mike suggested earlier, you can just ram something through. You can just ram it through and have and pass out of the House a bill,
and you're going to aim it at the Senate, and you're going to say,
no pun intended.
We
sent it
to the Senate.
It was good.
We loaded it up, and now what are they going to do with it? Now I think
the Senate's still Republican controlled.
That's right, to a greater degree.
Yeah, and then it has to go to the president. It has to go to the president. The president has veto power.
Yep. Now the one interesting thing, and I think everybody going to need to watch this. This election. The progressive candidates, and by that I mean your most progressive Democratic candidates in general, were not successful. Those seats, the ones that were gained, were primarily moderates. They were people running purple, and so that's something that's going to be really interesting for us all to watch. Is this people realizing that? That there's a radical center.
Maybe it'll give an opportunity to actually legislate.
Yeah.
In a practical way.
It's going to be
in a bipartisan way.
It's going to be interesting.
We'll see. But the point being, at the federal level, the likelihood of seeing any kind of, I'm using air quotes, but gun control legislation, any kind of restrictions on Second Amendment or availability of types of firearms, the likelihood of something like that passing, even with the House flipping, is low.
That's right. Now you will see lots of saber rattling.
Of course. Same kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's going to be out there.
Now, this is...
So that's the federal level.
That's the federal level. Let's talk about states.
Let's talk about states because
not the same.
That's where it's different. And there's...
Yeah. And so this is where it gets really interesting and important for sportsmen to start to think about. Because at the state level, you have the same processes you have in the federal level. But on the state level, you saw states who were split, like our federal government is now, that aren't anymore. So, for example...
like that our federal government will be in January.
Yes. Yeah. So you have states, examples like Colorado, Connecticut, New Hampshire, Maine, New York. These are places that used to have, a check somewhere in the system. And so now you're going to have states, and there are a number of them, that are going to be... all one party. And to be clear, there used to be quite a few states that, now it's going to be, Republicans, I think, had 26 were straight Republican control.
Right. So you're saying that the House and the Senate and that,
the House and the Senate in each state
were controlled
and the governorship.
And the governorship were controlled by one
party. So they could, they
either
can
Democrat or Republican.
Yeah, so if they get together and agree, they can move anything they want. And let's be frank, we live in Wyoming, and 90% Republican here, people don't agree. Just because one Republican likes an idea doesn't mean that that everybody agrees with that and it moves forward. It just doesn't happen.
But it is easier to move things forward. We've seen it in Wyoming. It's easier to move things forward. Yeah.
And it depends on people's priorities. Now, it used to be that I think it was 7 states where that was the case with Democrats. And so you had a larger number of states who they kind of, there was this kind of, where each side, had something. That number decreased, and it decreased by a significant margin. It decreased by something like 6 or 7 states, where you have 14 states that are D's across the board. You have 21 states that are R's across the board. You only have 13 states that are where that's shared. And so what you've seen is, like we talk about this polarization, you're actually seeing that now.
You're seeing it at a state level.
Yep, and which mirrors. I mean, it's important. It's important to know. We'll get to why, but it's also interesting to note. People are like, "Well, what's the deal? How come the House went one way and the Senate goes another way?" Remember, there are 435 members in the House, and so what you saw areas that were closer to urban areas. You saw those areas push towards the Democratic candidates.
Yeah, when you pull up a map of the country, you can draw circles around the major urban centers in the country. It's blue on the left.
It's blue on the right. There's a few blue dots in the middle where we have big urban centers,
right?
And everything else is red. Red being
rural red.
Rural red. And so, what does the Senate cover? The Senate,
right, it's everything.
It's two people for an entire state, and that's what you see this effect where you can't just have one individual catering to an urban center. You have to.
But you've bounced back to the federal level again. We were talking the state, and so
going back to the state level.
I want to got to be careful to confuse things here. So what Nephi was just he had started talking about state system, and he bounced to the federal here, talking about the makeup of Congress, the Senate, and House. And now you're going to bounce back to the
bouncing back.
You're
to
like
the state
a ping
level.
pong ball.
The thing to remember is that now it becomes these issues. So let's take an issue like Second Amendment. So issues like gun control. These issues now, when you have a state that is, and these are important issues to sportsmen. If you're going to see, federal land actions, where's that going to happen at?
Federal level.
Yeah, that's going to
happen at the federal level. If you're going to see firearms restrictions, where's that going to happen?
You're starting to see it more at the state level.
It's going to happen at the state level,
and we've seen it. I mean, states like Illinois, California,
Washington.
Yeah.
So and it's worth noting that there was significant changeover in governorships too. You saw a number of governors. Republicans are still the majority of governors, but I believe this to be correct. All the governors, and I checked them, so those governors, every governor that flipped, every one of those governors had a Second Amendment, a gun control platform.
Gun control platform, yeah.
And so they carry that with them, and they are now the leaders of those states. And so in cases where those states...
Where the houses match up with the governorship.
Colorado and New Mexico are examples of those. So now... they have the ability to potentially act on that. And that's why it's got to be important to sportsmen.
So at the state level, from a sportsman's perspective, wherever you live, whatever state you live in, those state politics are incredibly important.
Yes.
That's where a lot of the rubber meets the road on some of these issues that are really important to sportsmen. That's where, issues on access come into play. That can happen at the state level. That's where issues on Second Amendment come into play. That can happen at the state level. And the political makeup at the state level has been, like you noted, it's been changing. So, I sit here from where I sit and I look at the national level. And when I said at the beginning, everything's going to be fine. And I'd say it this way, don't worry, they're still not going to do anything. I just joke, a little tongue in cheek, but don't worry, they still won't be able to get anything done. We're going to be fine at the national level. But you got to pay attention at the state level because things happen. And case in point, I do want to point out there are 2 things, and I'll just use 2 examples, and there are probably a bunch more of these out there. But in the elections that happened, last week, there were at least in 2 states. I'm going to single out North Carolina and Georgia. There were state ballot initiatives. Actually, I don't know if North Carolina's was a ballot initiative or if it was a legislatively proffered process for constitutional amendment. But there were 2 constitutional amendments voted on in each of those states that directly involve sportsmen. And they both passed. And they were, so in North Carolina, it was a constitutional right to hunt and fish, which now makes them the 22nd or 23rd state, 22nd state, to formally adopt a constitutional amendment recognizing the right to hunt and fish. We should do a podcast just on that alone. I know we've talked about that
we touched on it,
in a prior podcast, but that'd be a fun one to talk about. Is just
what does that mean?
What does that mean, really? So we should probably do that at some point. Let us know, listeners, if you want us to do something like that on constitutional right to hunt and fish. The other one was in Georgia, and it was to create a trust fund, to create a trust account, like basically a natural resource trust account. So they diverted sales tax dollars from outdoor equipment sales in Georgia. They approved diverting those funds. So not a new tax, just diverting and earmarking an existing tax to go into this conservation fund that can then be used for wildlife and habitat related on the ground projects, for conservation. Those were both state level real impacts on hunters and anglers. And those types of things can be happening. Like we said, there's a 22nd constitutional amendment. There are a lot of states looking at this constitutional right to hunt and fish. There are a lot of states looking at how do we fund conservation. States like Missouri and Mississippi have addressed it. Colorado and Maine have addressed it. Now you have Georgia addressing it. So the things that can happen at the state level that directly impact your hunting and angling opportunities and conservation more generally.
It's much more impactful.
It's very impactful. Right?
I think that's, there's a misconception, and I don't know if it's a misconception, but I think whenever we find something we don't like and we think we found a solution, it seemed like a great idea to be like, hey, where does government happen from? And like, wow, wouldn't it be great if there was this national law that made everything that way or whatever? The reality is, for sportsmen, where's it happening at for you as sportsmen? It's happening on the state level. Whether you're talking about your tag, the price of your tags, whether you're talking about most of how can you hunt and fish on state lands?
Right, getting easements to access. Maybe you want to access federal land. Some of those easements are coming through state dollars. Maybe some are coming through federal dollars, but some are coming through state dollars too.
LWCF, even if you look at the application of that, where's the application?
It's applied stateside.
It's applied in the state side. And so you see the funding may be coming from federal, but like when you really, if you want to know which administrator and which agency is putting together their list of priorities for how that's going to get spent, that's happening in your state government. Mm-hmm. And people take it for granted too much that, state government has a lot of clout. They are partners in all of this.
Well, let me point out one more example at the state level, because we were talking, the examples I provided were really for the hunters and anglers on the lands side, right? The access and habitat and wildlife. But you've pointed out to me on the Second Amendment side, for example, Washington State, right? They had a ballot initiative relating to their firearms laws.
Yeah,
right?
This is a challenging issue for sportsmen.
Yeah. So what did that one do? What did that ballot, and did it pass, first of all?
So yeah, it did pass. Where's it in my notes?
So essentially bumped up the age for semi-automatic weapons from 18 to 21. It required some firearms training. Mm-hmm.
For gun purchases.
And it also made some felony provisions on, depending on the way you store your firearms.
And other background check requirements too.
Right. Yeah. It adjusted the background checks. Yeah.
So that's just another example of that, and that puts them, you've noted to me, that puts them in the same position as like California and Massachusetts and Hawaii as far as the type of restrictive gun laws they have. So you can put Washington in that camp now, not because of something that the federal government did,
but it's a state decision.
It was a state decision, and it was a voter. I mean, the voters decided this.
And it's likely going to be challenged.
Right.
So now, so let's try and bring this around to why, like, average sportsman, Joe sportsman in Montana or someplace like that, if you said like, well, why would I even care? For me, this is important because, if we want to continue to have the right to hunt and fish, it's going to take social acceptance of that. And that means bringing more people into the community.
Yeah.
The more difficult you make it, how much harder is it going to be? Like if you're in a state, there are states in the nation right now where I cannot loan you a box of shells. Like if you forget your shells for your rifle, I can't loan you those shells. It's against the law. Mm-hmm. I can't, you can't borrow a rifle. You can't.
That's a shame because I remember a time out elk hunting with Mike. we fortunately both shot 30-06s, but I'm like, Mike, I need one more.
Yeah,
that'll be a story for another day.
Yeah, a story for another day. I mean, there are a number of these, like little issues that people don't realize where you have conflicting laws on the state and federal level that could really bite you. As a hunter who's just passing through with a rifle, there's some challenging issues.
Hey, let me bounce back really fast, and I want to wrap this up. We want to, we've put a lot on the plate for people to think about, but there's one thing that we said, don't worry about it. Congress can't do anything, right? We're not, and we joke about it, but there is one period of time when Congress tends to get quite a bit done. And we are entering that time right now.
It is the
lame
we
duck.
call it the lame duck.
Lame duck.
The lame duck session is the date from the day after the general election until swearing in early January. So you have about a 2-month time period. And we call it the lame duck because you have people that are going to be cycling out of office. And the idea is, I don't know why they call it lame duck really, because the idea is, well, lame duck, you're not going to get anything done.
But now they do.
But really, that's when you push a lot of things through.
Yeah.
And so just to touch on it very briefly, there are a few lingering things out there on the federal level that are of great importance to sportsmen. Some we've covered, some we will cover in prior podcasts. Things like Land and Water Conservation Fund,
yep.
LWCF. That is something that there's an opportunity that may be to move it in the lame duck. There's an opportunity to reauthorize LWCF in the lame duck.
And Farm Bill.
And the Farm Bill is another one. That's when I say one that we haven't really talked about, but we will.
Yep.
That's one that will do a more detailed breakdown of the Farm Bill and why it's important, why you should care about the Farm Bill.
And the politics of this get really interesting because even if you have been holding on to something like lame duck, like LWCF before, you have to decide now if you're not going to be in leadership anymore, do you want this as someone else's legacy or yours?
Right.
And so it's your last chance. If you want to put your stamp on it, this is it.
So those are a couple of things that keep your eye on in these next 2 months, because there's an opportunity for both of those to move and be dealt with, because there's motivation to get things done, like you said, from a legacy standpoint and for other reasons as well, that we can dive into at some later time, maybe when we're talking about Farm Bill here in hopefully a couple of weeks. We might be able to talk about Farm Bill in more detail. So that's kind of a synopsis. We kind of run through, as a lot of information we've dumped out there on what's happened here with the election, right? Mm-hmm. And what's happened on the federal level, the state level. There's a lot there. If you have questions about this, we have an email address. Send us an email. We have Twitter. We have Facebook. We have Instagram. Shoot us a question on any of those platforms. Our handle there is @itsyourmountain. Our email address is yourmountain@itsyourmountain.com. Send us questions. We'll be happy to answer them. Heck, if you send us questions, maybe we'll just go ahead and answer them on the next podcast, and we'll credit you for giving us a great question to talk about.
And we're going to have some really exciting news to share with you all very shortly. So stay tuned.
Yeah, we're excited. It's not going to be long, and we're going to be able to share some pretty exciting news. I think we're looking forward to that. As always, remember,
get on the bandwagon.
Yeah, get on now. And
there won't be room.
So get on now. Get out there to iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Rate us. Get out there. Give us 5 stars, please. We could, give us 5-star rating.
Just like Wrong Grenade did.
Wrong Grenade. I loved that one. Wrong Grenade. What a great handle. Yep, he gave us a 5-star rating.
He's obviously knows what's up.
Do what Wrong Grenade does.
Sort of.
Yeah, get out there. Show us some support on iTunes or wherever you get it from. Leave us a comment. And And then we'll use that. It's our motivation. That's our motivation to keep doing this, to keep finding new content and trying to break these issues down for all of you out there that are enjoying it. And of course, we appreciate you listening. And you guys have anything else? Nothing else? Great. Because just remember, everybody out there, just remember life is about experiences. So go have one.